All right, today we're reading Psalm 83. As we always do, we will read through the psalm itself and then we'll work through some commentary. So here we go. O God, do not keep silence. Do not hold your peace or be still, O God. For behold, your enemies make an uproar. Those who hate you have raised their heads. They lay crafty plans against your people. They consult together against your treasured ones. They say, Come, let us wipe them out as a nation. Let the name of Israel be remembered no more. For they conspire with one accord. Against you they make a covenant. The tents of Edom and the Ishmaelites, Moab and the Hagrites, Gebal and Ammon and Amalek, Philistia with the inhabitants of Tyre. Asher also has joined them. They are the strong arm of the children of Lot. Selah. Do to them as you did to Midian, as to Sisera and Jabin at the river Kishon, who were destroyed at Endor, who became dung for the ground. Make their nobles like Oreb and Zeb, all their princes like Zebah and Zalmunna, who said, Let us take possession for ourselves of the pastures of God. O my God, make them like whirling dust, like chaff before the wind. As fire consumes the forest, as the flame sets the mountains ablaze, so may you pursue them with your tempest, and terrify them with your hurricane. Fill their faces with shame, that they may seek your name, O Lord. Let them be put to shame and dismayed forever. Let them perish in disgrace, that they may know that you alone, whose name is the Lord, are the most high over all the earth. This psalm has several interesting elements to it. Number one, I call it a cry out psalm. I think there's a common term that I'm starting to see called a psalm of lament. That does kind of presuppose a few things, in my opinion, that I don't know that always fit. But I could be wrong on that. So I still will call it a cry out psalm. We're crying out to the Lord. And I think it fits very well with our experience in our life, like we would cry out to God about these things. This is a nationalistic psalm, which most cry out psalms are. They have to do with the establishment or the punishment of Israel through the actions of other nations, where other nations are oppressing Israel. Some of them, this one, I would include this in this case, some of them are lamenting what is being planned against Israel. Others of them deal with the fact that Israel has been invaded, people have been carried off, there's been a really bad destructive defeat or invasion, something like that. This one seems to be pointed at a situation where there's a planned invasion, or they know of plans of other nations who want to destroy Israel. Okay? So keep in mind, the common theme in all of these is that they are appealing to God for their source of rescue. They are not going outside, which if you go through Kings and Chronicles, you will see very often kings making alliances that God did not command. And God even would come to them. Why did you go to them for help? Why didn't you come and ask me? And if you know your Old Testament history of Israel very well, you know there are battles where they had some wins and then they went out without consulting God and were defeated. These are all cases that illustrate exactly the point that we're making, which is that this psalm is appealing to God as the source of rescue. Okay? In our context, it would look like something like we're appealing to our finances, or we're appealing to something we can work out. We're doing the American way where we pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. You know, we're self-made man. You know, we are the source of everything you need is inside of you. All these anti-God messages that even many times have crept into the church. If you do good things, you get good things out. If you give to my ministry, God's going to do good things for you. This is a falsehood that's equivalent to going to these other nations for help, because it's the worldly wisdom that says if I do these things, I get this expected outcome. The suffering of Israel here that you're seeing, we see this over and over again in Scripture. God allowed and even caused suffering of Israel to bring about the change that he wanted. And what I want you to see here that's really, really important is at the end of the psalm, which we'll get to in a moment, but just consider this in this kernel that we're talking about right now, that the end here that they seek is not simply their rescue, but that God's name will be glorified. And that's what God is always going for. One of the mistakes we've made in American Christianity is that Jesus came to save us. And while that's true, that was not the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal was to glorify God's name. Jesus came to glorify the Father. The Father sent Jesus to glorify Jesus. We see this in John 17. When Jesus says his high priestly prayer, he says, now I'm about to finish the work. Glorify me. I'm here to finish the work. I'm glorifying you. He doesn't say, I'm here to finish the work. I've almost got them saved. There is some mention of that in that chapter. But the work God is doing is always to glorify his name. Now, I will tell you, I struggled with this for a long time because it feels selfish. And John Piper and Don Carson both helped me out quite a bit in their teaching, in that if you think about it, if the nature of God is that he is the highest being in the universe, then all glory and acclaim accords to him. Everything good. You look out, I'm looking out a window at some flowers and some birds. There's some birds nesting with some baby birds up in my porch. I'm seeing the green, even though it's Texas and it's hot. There's still some green out there. And, I'm feeling cool air on my back right now from my air conditioning unit, on that pleasant feeling of that. I drank some beverage this morning that I really enjoy, and my senses enjoyed that. I'm reading information that I get a lot of joy out of. All of this points to the glory of God, because he's the one who created it. He created your ability to enjoy anything. Okay? So if that is true, then the highest function that we can have is to glorify God. The highest function any action could ever have is to accord to God's glory. Okay? It's kind of like a magnet. If you take a strong magnet and stroke a screwdriver repeatedly in the same direction, that screwdriver will eventually become magnetic. And you can pick up little things like small screws and even like paper clips and things like that. It won't be a really strong magnet. The point here is that that screwdriver now is a core. It's like aligning with a magnet now. And of course, the metaphor immediately breaks down because a magnet is not the highest thing in the universe or anything like that. But I hope you understand what I'm saying, is that the molecules in that screwdriver could rebel and say, hey, it's selfish of you to want me to change directions. I don't want to. I'm fine where I'm at. Why do I need to change directions for you? Well, the purpose of the actor, in this case the magnet, acting on the screwdriver is to make it like the magnet. That's the purpose. And God is acting in our lives to make us more like him for his glory. His glory in this case is the magnet. It's the ultimate aim, maybe we could say. The ultimate state of our lives is to glorify God. Now, God will bring suffering into our lives. Jesus said this, 1 Peter 1 says this, James 1 says this, Paul says it throughout his epistles. That Colossians 1, in fact, where Paul says that he's finishing up the sufferings in his body for the sake of Christ's body, stating implicitly that the suffering God has brought to him is bringing about the furthering of the gospel. And in fact, when Paul started his ministry, Paul said to, I think Simeon is his name, go and get Paul, because I must show him how much he must suffer for my name. And of course, our salvation was brought through Jesus' suffering. This is all by God's design. Human suffering, God brings human suffering into being to glorify himself. Now, that's a hard truth. That's a hard truth. But it is something that we must digest as Christians and submit to fully understand and execute God's will. Because the truth is if this is the way God operates, then we must accord with that. We must agree with that. We must submit to that. And it's very clear in Scripture that this is the way he works. A few prominent examples of this is God bringing Pharaoh. He said, I raised you up to show my glory in the earth. Now, that's a simple idea as far as reading it in a sentence. But the implications of it are massive, because that means God raised him up to oppress the Israelites and all of that oppression, highly probable that there was a lot of death and probably a good amount of abuse that happened at the hands of the Egyptians to the Israelites over 400 years. Over 400 years. I raised you up to show my glory in the earth. When he talks to Abraham about the land of Canaan that he's giving to him, he said, you can't go in yet because they have not filled up their full measure of sins to be to the level that I will. You have to infer this from Scripture, but it seems the idea seems there that when that full measure of sin is filled up, then I will take my judgment out on them and will send in the Israelites to kill them. That's what's there. That's what's in the text. So what we see there is all of the sin and the evil that was done by these nations. They sacrificed their children to idols. There was rape, oppression, murder. Across each of these nations would do it to the other. And even many times within their own borders. God allowed all of that to go on for 400 years. It was another 400-year increment that we see. And God allowed all that so that at the time that he could glorify himself in the world through Israel going in and driving out those people. And many times killing everybody in the town, in the city or the nation. So what we see in Scripture is that God continually, consistently uses suffering to glorify himself. So let's go ahead and get back into the Psalm. But this is a really important concept that it runs from Genesis 1 all the way to the end of Revelation. There's no place in Scripture where it is not there. Now, that probably is going to feel like an overstatement because obviously Genesis 1 is the creation of the world. But from Genesis to Revelation, there's a common theme where God consistently uses suffering to glorify himself. In our individual lives as Christians now, it's no longer done through a nation. Although I do believe that it's still consistent. God says, I raise up leaders and I take leaders down. I don't think that's any different now. I think he raises up. You think of the leaders who are we would call them anti-American, and they're godless. We would say it that way. God raised them up. And we have to accept that because that's what Scripture teaches. All the suffering that's under these countries that oppress Christians right now and many times murder Christians, God raised those leaders up. That's not outside of God's control. So it's a very, very important concept in Scripture because it's everywhere. It runs through the entirety of Scripture. So let's get back into this. Behold, your enemies make an uproar. They who have hated you raise their heads. They lay crafty plans. They consult together. They say, come, let us wipe out these people. We're going to wipe out the entire nation of Israel. They conspire with one accord. They're in unity against us, God. Hey, this is getting serious. These enemies of ours are getting together. It's not just disconnected enemies who hate us, but maybe they hate each other too. And you can see this throughout the Chronicles and Kings and the history of Israel. Different nations or kingdoms will hate each other or defeat each other. You can see this when the leader of Assyria comes up and he says, I'm going to defeat you just like I defeated all these others. Well, all those other countries or nations were not the nation of Israel. And so he's out there already oppressing and destroying other nations, right? But now what he's saying here is, hey, now our enemies have united against us. They're going to join forces. God, don't you see what's going on? And we come back to this point again, where they're leaving the outcome in the hands of God. They're crying out to him, rouse yourself. Come to our rescue. Help us. Okay? Then they list the enemies who are banded together. And then they say an interesting thing, that the strong arm of the children of Lot. Now, in the history of Israel, in the genealogies, we see Esau. I'm pretty sure, I should know this better, but it's either Edom or Moab is direct offspring of Esau. But this is the strong arm of the children of Lot. Okay? So we see this tracing all the way back to the beginning. And Lot's rebellion against God resulted in these nations who are rebellious against God, right? Now he goes through a list. Do what you did to these other people. You've done this before. Do it again. I think that's a wonderful, wonderful basis for our ability and permission to cry out to God. Hey, you've rescued me before. I've seen you rescue other people the same way. This other guy over here, my buddy, he lost his job, and you provided a job. Provide a job for me too. Provide sustenance for my family. Not I'm going to go out and provide it for myself and take glory for myself, but God, you provide it for me so that your name may be glorified. Not, you have to be careful. There's a fine line between, hey God, do what I want, and then I'll give you glory. There's a fine line between that and, God, do your work, rescue me, provide for me, so that your name would be glorified. Because many times in these Psalms, this one doesn't do it, but many of these Psalms cry out to God, and in the end of the Psalm, they close it by saying, but I'm still going to praise you no matter what. So you see, there's not a quid pro quo of, God, you give me what I want, and then I'll give you what you want. It's not like that. That's the prosperity gospel. That's a heresy, or it's just outright, falsehood. It's a false view of God. But we must submit ourselves to God to say, whatever your will is for me, do it. I'm going to ask for this thing, and Jesus modeled this for us perfectly in the most wonderful gift. I don't know. The most wonderful is probably an overstatement, but it's pretty spectacular that Jesus gave us the gift of showing that even he prayed that this cup may pass from him if it's possible, right? So even Jesus, knowing that his death was predestined before the foundation of the world, asked for it to be removed if it was possible. Yet, your will be done. So, then he goes further in here. This becomes an imprecatory psalm where the psalmist is calling down punishment, death, shattering of bones, shattering of teeth, blood soaking the garments on enemies, but not taking it out themselves. This is really, really important. God, you punish this person. Please stop this person. Whatever you have to do to this person, please stop them from doing whatever they're doing to me, or to my group, or to my church, or to my nation. I think we can pray for our nation, any nation that we're in. It's important to understand we have an American-centric version of Christianity, and we tend to think of things through the lens of America. This is an outlier example, but it really bears down. It shows how arrogant we are in America. We have a very popular debate in America of King James only. It's fading because I think it's kind of stands on its face when you look at the other versions that they're just fine. There are many, many ways they're better than the King James. The King James is good, not saying that the King James is bad. And in fact, it stands as a really outstanding version for its time. For its time, it's stupendous. It's amazing. But over time, there have been better versions. In fact, the writers, the interpreters of the King James said that in the original introduction. You can go find it online. My point of bringing this up is when we have this debate, there is an obvious and glaring error that we're making, and that is that the King James is an English translation. So to have this debate is a very American, or at least English-speaking kind of conceit that we're adding to the argument. We're not even considering the fact that the majority of nations in history did not speak English. Okay, that's only been a very recent, the last 250, 300 years, maybe 350 since the ascendancy of England. So it's a very late event in history, and so these other nations would not have the King James Bible. And so to say King James only as the King James is the highest level, that's a very kind of America-centric argument. And we tend, in America especially, because of our media deployment, we just tend to think of things through an American first lens. And we have to understand that Christianity was built to function in any situation, in any nation, and under any oppression or relative freedom like we have. It was built to function in any country, any situation. So we can't ever take on American ideals and concepts as we define things in the Bible. It's a very difficult bias to overcome, but it's very important for us. Now, let's finish this out. Fill their faces with shame that they may seek your name. Bring this punishment on them so that they may seek your name and know who you are. You can actually see this function happening in nations in the Old Testament. There are several cases of people saying, hey, we heard you were coming and we saw what God was doing. We'll submit to anything you want. Just don't do to us what God did. Ask your God not to do what he did to those other nations. They saw how great God was, and they submitted to him based on what they saw. Our modern equivalent of that, we're not going out and shooting people in the face for the glory of God, and then somebody saying, hey, okay, I'll bend the knee. We're not doing that. What we're doing is we're going out there and living a life of the Beatitudes of Matthew 5. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are the meek. Blessed are the pure in heart. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst after righteousness. That's our life. And then God works through that and ministers his gospel into communities. That's the new model. It's no longer a nation that's been established by God who defeats other nations for the glory of God. That was Israel. That's not any nation, not just America, but any nation. So let them be put to shame and dismayed forever. Let them perish in disgrace, that they may know that you alone, whose name is the Lord of the Most High over all the earth. Everything accords to God's glory. And I say that with as much gentleness as I can bring to bear, because I know that many of you out there are suffering horribly, either through health or loss of people important to you, people close to you, loss of job. Different losses in our lives are just very heavy to bear. So please don't hear me saying this lightly. I say this as somebody who's lost a lot of people close to me and have people very close to me that are suffering horribly right now, and I can't do anything about it. And it's horrible. It's a heavy, horrible thing to carry. And so I say this just to point us back to Scripture, to point you back to the Lord. I hope that you're in a good church where you're surrounded with community who will lift you in prayer and hopefully support, physical support. But if they can't do that, then, lifting you up through prayer, pointing you back to the Word. Just remember to stay faithful to God, because that is the fruit of the Spirit that he is bearing out in your life. I wish you well. God bless you, and have a great day.